a couple items on the agenda here. One is one that Fabio and I have been discussing in the SIG CLI Slack channel for probably a couple weeks here. And I think it's generally focused around the sustaining engineering in kube control and how are we going to make sure it's staffed correctly. One thing that we see is there's a lot of contributions to, from the community or other SIGs to kube control, but they're not always focused on kind of the things that are priorities for us. So they might be other commands. For instance, I think there's debug command that's being added and one about service accounts, a number of other things. And we're trying to, we have to review those, review the proposals, try and figure out if the flags make sense. A lot of times, if someone else reviews them, I'm not sure how much attention someone from SIG CLI, that's a regular attendee here, gives those things. And we have another of command types that we haven't finished really and are kind of incomplete. Notably, the create commands. If you try and write the documentation for how to imperatively create things, it's not fun because we have to basically say we're like haven't really completed this stuff and we don't know if we're going to complete it. Just a couple of things there are like kube control run and kube control create deployment don't have the same set of flags, even though they're supposed to do the exact same thing. And so we can't say they're the same. And we don't have create commands for all the stuff. We just have a subset of the workload types. So when we write the documentation for this stuff, it's just not, there's not a clear user story for what can you create and what can't you. And apply similarly has just a long tail of issues that we've been trolling through. So,
and I'd love to see us use the create stuff as a way to sort of initialize a YAML file on disk too, right? So it's like I can create, output it to disk, tweak it, and then instantiate it, right? To start to try and draw the connection between those. But it's easy to put feature requests out there. That's the problem.
You can actually do that now, and I
can
think,
you? We don't document it well.
No, we don't. I'll double check it. Have you read the new imperative guides? I'm not sure if it's documented there. I tried to document it, but
those were still a while ago, right? Have you updated them since then?
I've updated them since a while ago, but not recently.
All right. Well, stick them in the notes when you get a chance.
Anyway, I can try and highlight that better. Maybe I'll put it up front in a big, bold, read this sort of thing. You can do that now. The flags that you pass in aren't super obvious because it's like dry run plus output to YAML. Like, what does that mean? So maybe we could have an alias for those flags that just says like, print YAML or something. And kind of on that same note, I think one thing we probably want to think about is what commands should we be adding at this point. I think we have a pretty good understanding of, okay, kube control should manage your config and be able to manage objects in the cluster. So the imperative create commands and set commands and view commands make sense. It starts to get a little more fuzzy when it's like, okay, what debug utilities do we want? We have attach, we have exec. We're adding in this new debug command. But is that the limit of it, or what other commands are we going to accept in there? What should be plugins? So I think we want to probably come up with some guidance around that we can tell people, no, we don't want commands for anything besides these three categories, potentially, or managing objects and debugging objects. And everything else is a plugin.
Yeah, and along with that, we're getting pretty close to V1 in plugins. I have 2 pull requests that are waiting for review, and after that, we will be mostly done in terms of what we propose for V1 for plugins. However, after that, there's the documentation, but also something I've been thinking about was if you want to have this kind of official plugins, so new commands that we don't want to be added to the full set of kubectl commands. One good example is probably the service catalog. So how we distribute them, do we make it part of the usual release process and provide packages for these plugins, separate packages for these plugins, or just so actually how to actually distribute those plugins that are not exactly part of kubectl but kind of official.
So maybe I'm not sure if there's anything we have any action items out of this directly here. I'd like to see probably a document around what kind of PRs that we want to accept and what kind of PRs we want to hold off on until we have a better story around kind of our technical debt issues. The other thing I was thinking, oh, go on. Okay, sorry. The other thing I was thinking we might do, and then this could come into play in the repo, some of the repo split technical debt we have to, or repo split work we're gonna have to do, is like trading kind of PRs. Like if you want to see a PR to add a flag to a particular command to do some feature, like help out breaking one of the dependencies and just have a list. I have a LinkedIn wiki page of about 200 dependencies we need to break. And so if we can just trade with the community, that might help.
So this whole idea of distribution and what is in the release, what is out of the release, I don't think across Kubernetes we have a really good idea about this. I think one example, and I don't know if you've been tracking this, Phil, we hit this with kubadmin where we had some 1.7 blocking kubadmin bugs in the kubadmin repo because we broke out the issues first. Those were not being tracked by the release team. They're like, oh, look, there's no bugs that are blocking there. They totally weren't looking outside of the main repo. And I know now that kubectl has bugs that are broken out also, maybe a similar thing. But then there's this question, okay, what repos actually need to be tracked for part of the release versus what repos are on a different release schedule? And that's just going to get messy. So I don't have an answer there. I'm just saying, like, it's something that you might want to, like, we need to pay attention to, and we should probably form an opinion about what we think the right thing is. I don't know what the right thing is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the kind of the direction I've been trying to push things is ownership of all the release blocking items being pushed out from centrally managed in a single like release team, because it does lend itself towards stuff getting dropped on the floor. Like every release, the release team is kind of guessing at what tests are blocking and what tests are not blocking. And oh, that one's been failing forever, so don't worry about it. It's really hard to keep that stuff straight. And so I think if maybe we had a mechanism for folks to publish all the stuff that they're like is blocking the release from their perspective for the stuff they own, then the release team can hold off on, make sure that the release doesn't go out without that getting fixed, and then stop trying to track it further.
Yeah, but nobody's connected the dots yet, so.
Totally.
Kind
Yep,
of right now.
that's just a straw man. That's a good point. So thanks for that heads up. For the kube control repo, we'll definitely have to keep a close eye on it this release. And the same thing with the tests. I know if I published did I talk about the test dashboard that was set up for us in test grid? Let's see, maybe I can share this. So we got our own tab in the test grid where it's filtered just for tests specific to kube control in each of the test jobs. And what that allows us to do is kind of have a view into, like, is our stuff broken or is our stuff not broken? Here we go. So there's a summary page, and you can kind of look through here. And I come daily, I probably check this and look through and say, okay, do we look good or what's broken? And we're trying to get the one set up for each SIG or each area of ownership, at least, right? So SIG network, SIG node, SIG storage. And then that will give folks more control over the stuff they own.
Yeah, by the way, I don't think we have a link for that page in our contributing doc, right? I'll make sure I add it there because it's a nice way even for new contributors to check, so there are things to fix, etc.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll add that note for that.
When you say the contributing doc, are you thinking the README page in the Kubernetes in the community repo?
It's in the community repo. There's
Okay.
a contributing MD doc. Let me paste the link actually on chat here.
Because we just did some work on a ContribX to sort of reformat those to be more regular. So I'm interested to see how people, hopefully we can start using that as more of a place to marshal sort of resources for SIGs.
Yeah, and you're talking about the kube control specific contributing doc, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also, we mentioned as the first topic of the meeting agenda about how we are in the need of help for, reviewing PRs and things like that, and reviewing proposals, etc. So something I didn't do yet, but I think it's worth doing. And I'm really not sure how much of a result that would have. But anyway, I'll probably do that, send an email to the public lists, probably users and dev, and calling for anyone interested in contributing with SIG-CLI, kubectl specifically. So here's our contributing doc. So I don't think that we ever made that public knowledge on any lists or anything like that. So I'll make sure I do that, and hopefully we can get some new people to help a little bit.
Yeah, I think finding ways to bring more folks in is good. I was just commenting to Kelsey here that it's sad that like kube control is the front door for so many people and there's so few folks working on it. It's kind of a tragedy. So I wish I could do more personally, but yeah, I'll help evangelize at least.
Yeah, and actually it's very interesting because for really newcomers is a not too hard place to get started, right? So helping with commands is definitely probably much easier in comparison to starting with, I don't know, controllers or something like that. So it's a very good place for newcomers. So in that sense, so helping with basic commands, fixing simple bugs and things like that it's a very good starting point.
So with that in mind, I think on the agenda, I don't know if it's there, is Shahid, I'm sure I'm pronouncing the name wrong, sent email asking about doing port forward proxy stuff, and nobody responded there. And I saw that is that the funny string? Is that you?
No, I'm not sure if the funny string is me. Yeah, I'm definitely here.
Okay, well, welcome. I don't know if we want to do it now, but I definitely want to take time to address the email that you sent and see if we can get you going in this meeting. And thanks for calling in.
Sure, that will be very helpful if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make it clear, that's a direct reflect of us, being short in terms of contributors, because I was speaking to Philip earlier this week or last week that we are really working a lot on code reviews and a lot on proposal reviews, but we're really just getting much more than we as a team are able to handle. So it's a problem, and it's not nice for us, and I bet it's much worse for contributors.
Yeah, I think this is a really good example of kind of what I was talking about earlier, where this is a bug. Obviously, it would be nice if it's fixed. It's not on the most urgent list, probably for us, or what I've had the most folks wanting to get resolved. So trying to balance those priorities is challenging. Is this, were you just picking this bug up because you had a specific interest in fixing this issue and wanted it fixed, or you just need more work to pick up?
Yeah, so we figured this out because we wanted to forward one of the pods from the cluster onto a local machine. So what we are developing is a kind of a development tool for other mobile or web app developers to build their backups on. So what happened was we need to have a way of people to use Kubernetes locally. So we are using Minikube for that. And in order to get one of the pods from Minikube forwarded to the local system so that they can view something in the browser, we needed the pod forwarding feature. So I'm not sure if I'm making sense. So basically what happened was we wanted the pod forwarding to stay alive even when the pod restarts, because our architecture is in such a way that any configuration change restarts the pod. So the tunnel is broken every time the pod restarts. So
Okay.
that's how,
Yeah, sorry, I'll probably need to look, do some more reading to have enough context before I understand that.
So I do think that this is something that's bitten me. I know when I was working on the book that Kelsey and I are working on, you do like a kube control run, and then you're gonna be like, okay, now we want to connect to it, and you have to go through this step where it's like, well, let's find a pod that got created out of that deployment, and then do a port forward to that. Versus where in reality, when I say I want to port forward to the deployment, or I want to port forward to the service, right? Yeah. And so it's like there's just a missing gap there, and you end up having to actually expose people to details that they probably don't care about to actually get to that point. So I think from a usability point of view, this is a little bit of a rough edge, and it's definitely, I think, from a capability point of view, if you're restarting stuff and you don't want to restart it. I think the tricky thing here is depending on how this ends up getting done, it could be something that hits a bunch of different areas, right? So it may not just be kube control; it may hit some other parts of the stack server side to be able to really support this. And so I think it's probably a little bit of a trickier thing to design and make work than it might first appear.
Yeah, that's when I discovered the kube control proxy command, which actually forwards to the API server, but then it appears in a /API/ sub URL, which is not really user friendly if we are exposing a web service kind of thing.
Yeah, that proxy stuff is really an HTTP proxy. I started looking into it based on your email, and actually there is no great description out there around the difference between kube control proxy versus kube control port forward. And so it was something that I was going to do a little bit of research and try and write up, but then I ran out of time. But it's not obvious in terms of which one you use in which situation. I think probably the most generic here is the port forward, but yeah, so
that's the point of confusion. We finally ended up using a SSH-based port forwarding to a service port, but yeah, we would like to see a more stable fix on that. That's when I thought, yeah, let's pitch in and work on this.
Well, very cool.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, sorry to take a little bit of a left turn there. You just didn't use it.
No, that's fine. I know every one of you are super busy. So yeah, I kind of, yeah, that's fine, totally fine. I'll also do my own research and come up with more digging into it.
Okay, great. I'll give a quick just update on the repo split, some of the work that's being done there. So before we even get to the problems that kubeadmin would face and most other folks probably would face, is we have a bunch of entanglement with kube control with a bunch of Kubernetes libraries that aren't exposed. And we'd have to work through how to break all those dependencies before we could even move it into its own repo. We've kind of triaged them into a couple different categories, some of which are really easy, like it's just a library for kube control that lives in a different package, so move it. Others are a little more challenging, such as utilities that maybe a couple different folks use, but are relatively self-contained, don't depend on like types or API machine or anything. And so those could be potentially moved to their own standard library repo that Tim has talked about a number of times. There's a fair list of those things, so it's not gonna, it requires a little bit of work, but straightforward at least. And then there's other dependencies that are like helpers for types. So these depend on maybe pods, but tell whether a pod is healthy or not, right? Like for rolling out, is this pod healthy enough to roll out more pods or something like that? And then there's this whole thing about unversion types. So anyway, there's a bunch of different types of dependencies we have. We need to go through and figure out, bucket each of them, and then kind of come up with a story of how to solve each type.
So Phil, how much easier does this get if we move to, if we delete all the code that has a priori knowledge of all the objects and we move to the sort of pure Swagger world, open API world? Does that simplify this dramatically?
What do you mean, like we just get rid of those commands, or what do you mean delete?
No, maybe I'm misunderstanding. So like we're in transition now where we move from sort of having a bunch of sort of hard-coded stuff that actually has a priori knowledge built in to actually being able to be super generic and drive everything off of the Swagger Open API definitions, right? And so there's this question of like, you know, do we do that download and parse that, or is that an optional? And right now, my understanding is that we're starting to go down that path, but I think for 1.7, it's optional, right? If we fully complete that process so that we're, you know, driven by the open API stuff and we're, you know, as the only way to actually do stuff, does that simplify the set of dependencies that kube control depends on?
My scientific wild ass guess is 20%.
Okay, so it's a little bit of savings there, but it's not as big as we might hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important because right now the things that impacts are broken with version skew.
Okay.
When you change those types. So it's really important to do in terms of cutting the dependencies. Like the really ugly stuff is we got, like for instance, the internationalization stuff. Kube control relies upon, it should rely upon, it makes sense, but it's in the Kubernetes repo.
Okay, yeah. And then like, I imagine that might be some of the unversion types type of stuff, right? Like the unversion, like, cause you know, cutting the dependency on the unversion types is a healthy thing for kube control to do, right?
Yeah, in theory, I've gotten mixed messages from API machinery. Chow says you have to have the unversion types. Daniel says don't use them. The reason, so the unversion types come into play in kind of two places. One is, I think probably what you're thinking about, which is libraries that, like Kubernetes libraries that we pass in the types to.
Yeah.
Those we want to break. Another way they come into play is, I think Chow was saying unversion types are useful for if you don't know what versions of a object a server supports. So say you want to like get deployment, right? And the new server has a new version of deployment. If you use the
apps version versus the extensions version.
Exactly. If you use the unversion kind, it'll fall back. If you talk to an old server, it'll fall back on the extensions kind. It'll just find like what version, what's the most recent, what's the recommended deployment. If you don't use the unversion client, you either have to just use the oldest kind you support.
Oh, I see. Or you have to write multiple versions of the code or whatever, or you have to write your own unversion conversion stuff, right? Okay.
You either have to write a switch that says what versions does the server support, what's the recommended one, okay, that's the type I'm going to use. Or you just stick with the oldest one that you're going to support.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sucks. I totally see why we want the unversion ones now.
So, but the unversion type, yeah, I don't know. Daniel says it's terrible. So.
Well, the problem with the unversion types is that that's going to change over time, and so like there's no guarantees as you move from one version of the client Go to another that it's going to be stable.
It's going to surprise people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So rock, hard place.
Oh.
I'm leaning towards just using the. So what we use these for is specific like porcelain commands.
Yeah.
Like the create deployment, for instance. So I'm kind of, my initial thoughts are it's kind of okay if like the porcelain commands don't use the latest hotness.
Yeah.
You know,
Or if you have multiple versions of them because you kind of want to version those things anyways, and like, yeah.
Yeah, or we can maybe we can support a couple versions. Maybe we support the newest and the last old one, but not like all of them. I don't know.
Okay. And then what about breaking out like federation commands are now built into kubectl right now. Like I think we need to cut the cord a little bit on federation too. Would that would that simplify things if we sort of make that be the federation folks' problem to do their own extension?
Yeah, although I'm like that's always kind of been what I'm thinking. But that's such a small portion of the dependencies. It's like 10 of the 200 packages. I'm like,
chip away, man, 10 at a time.
If that was our last thing, I'd be like, we're done.
And we were doing kubeadmin, we sort of did it as a separate binary with the idea that like, okay, as the extension stuff comes in, maybe now we have kubectl admin, but that would be an extension. And so we try to keep that somewhat clean from the kubectl stuff. So, okay.
It's really smart. I noticed that. I did notice that, and it's really smart.
Yeah, and as we actually built it out in the repo, we tried to have a clean set of dependencies to the rest of the repo too. So we should have a relatively painless extraction for kubeadmin at least.
You're going to have to deal with like the other problems, which is integration and testing.
Yeah, that's the thing that's why we didn't do it to begin with. That's why I'm like, all right, I don't want to be the first one to do that.
Yeah, which we'll get to, but I mean, it might be a year before we break these 200 things.
Yeah. Okay. You want to chip in, write some code, Kelsey? No? No? All right.
It's like kind of like Tom Sawyer painting the fence, right? Is that who, or Huckleberry? I can't remember who it was. Painting the fence, and he's all like, "Oh, it's the most fun thing in the world. I'll charge you $2 to paint the fence." You know.
Okay, so I mean, like, what do you think, Phil? I mean, like, are there sort of smaller milestones that we can actually start chipping away at, that we can sort of declare victory on, that we can motivate people around?
Yeah, I think so. My goal for 1.7 is just the pure utilities.
Okay.
And that's going to exercise some different machinery we're going to have to figure out how to build. Like we're going to have to figure out how to sync code into the Kubernetes repo as vendored, right? And if we don't do the hacky staging thing that basically cheats, we're gonna have to solve those problems, and we're gonna have to figure out how to solve kind of the diamond problem, which I have some ideas around. But essentially, if we have a utilities repo that depends on Ugorji's library, and Kubernetes depends on Ugorji's library, and API machinery depend on Ugorji's library, they should all depend on the same version of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then there's the question of like, okay, do we want to take an early dependency on go dep or dep versus go deps? You know what I'm saying, right? The new thing that Sam's working on.
Is that the new natively supported go dep?
Yeah. Because that starts looking more like traditional package management, where you specify the versions that you can work with, you do semver, and then, you essentially, have a way that you sort of resolve all that, bring it together, pick the agreed upon version that works for everybody, and then lock it down.
Yeah, I wouldn't change the main repo to that as a gating factor for this, because I think it's going to be...
That's going to take forever. Okay, yeah.
But certainly we might be able to experiment with the new repos we create. Like it doesn't necessarily have to use the same package management tool.
So one of the things, and I don't know, and I think I'd love to get your opinion on this, because I think it's going to impact this group a lot, is like there is like all the package util stuff, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Like, we have this goal where we want every piece of code to roll up to a SIG. I have no idea what SIG package util ends up in. Right? Yeah. I was proposing like SIG bag of crap, right? Or SIG kitchen sink, because it really is like. So okay, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if folks here have an opinion on that.
I mean, I think of package util stuff similarly to the Google collection libraries, Guava, the Apache collection libraries, this sort of stuff, where there's a team within Google that just manages the utilities. You know, my pie in the sky dream would be that it actually becomes prestigious, because this stuff doesn't have to be just for Kubernetes, right? It could be all the Go stuff. And so, you know, the carrot might be, hey, other projects, other Go projects could use this. You get more exposure, more usage. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think just think about, like, because I think we're going to be forcing this faster through this group than anybody else is, because it's a sort of a nice to have for everybody else. It's a requirement as kube control gets drawn out, and nobody's in a hurry to actually give all the package util stuff a home. I suggested that we form an architecture SIG and we put it there, because it actually is kind of a core thing. And so, like, you know, it's part of sort of rolling up your sleeves. If you want to, like, commit on sort of overall architecture, you have to help. You have to help do the sort of the grotty work of actually refactoring util.
Yeah, that's true. Let's see. So I guess just some data points are, moving it out doesn't mean it doesn't take it from it had an owner to now it doesn't have an owner. It just never had an owner, and this makes it obvious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, right now, like, I think I'm on the top level owner, so I get, you know, once in a while drawn into PRs on these things, you know, but yeah, it's kind of a mess. Okay. But, you know, because it's a, you know, this group is a forcing function, if we have strong opinions on who the owner should be, like, we can help push that and make it happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, maybe the closest I can think of is API machinery, simply because they do, like, it's just the closest thing to the fit, but they won't like that, and it's fair. Like, it's not something they should take on.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. Okay, let's table that. But if you see obvious candidates, or if you see discussions, we can help connect the dots there and try and make forward progress.
Yep. Sounds good. Something to think about over the next weeks and months. Great. Okay, we have two proposals, the alpha command and the unset command. The reason for the proposals here is just to try and get a forcing function on resolution for some of these things. The first one, it looks like a PR for the code. So I'm not sure this is, typically I think these are for a proposal on whether or not to do something, and not acceptance of code. But we can, if anyone wants to discuss whether or not we want an alpha command, that we can do that here.
Yeah, I think that PR actually links to a proposal, not specific to the alpha command, but for new command, kubectl debug. So I think that's where the alpha command proposal, you know, came up.
Yeah, the debug is its own proposal that we should review. I see here.
I mean, so first of all, I think, you know, my gut is, and and looking at it from the outside, G-Cloud has sort of an alpha group and a beta group for, you know, alpha and beta commands. There's, you know, it's very clear that you're running something that's not going to be long-term supported. It seems to be working pretty well. We have an alpha group in kubeadmin, and we do it as a way to just sort of say, hey, look, this is still, you know, still fuzzy, and the command line interface here can change. So without looking at the specifics of the PR, I think it seems like a reasonable idea out the gate. I don't know. What are the arguments against?
No, I didn't have any. I agree. I think it makes sense. Maybe
yeah,
if
I absolutely agree also. My only concerns were in terms of naming and all of that, but I wasn't aware of alpha under kubeadmin. So it's the same name and all of that. So yeah, I think that actually the alpha proposal looks good.
And like I said, I think it's probably just borrowing the pattern from G-Cloud, and all indications that I've seen is that that's worked out okay.
Yeah, and that's where probably plugins should be at the moment, right? Under alphas, because today we have kubectl plugins, but it's alpha. So actually, the need is there. So we all the time have, not yet production ready new commands. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's like nobody's going to take a long-term dependency on something called alpha. So at least we have a little bit of safety there.
Yeah.
And the command itself is alpha.
Yeah.
Alpha is alpha. So if we decide to get rid of it,
nobody can complain.
right there in the name.
Yeah,
Okay.
no compromises in terms of keeping, stable.
Maybe in a couple weeks or the next meeting we can come back to the debug one. Fabiano, did you put the proposals here, or who added them?
Yeah, I added them. I got the ones I have on open tabs on my browser and pasted them. So there was the new alpha command and also unset from Menchi.
What does unset do? Okay, so it'll actually go through and essentially do set to nothing.
That's from, okay, Charlie, is that who it is? Okay, I haven't actually had a chance to read that one. We should, I think, if we want to make a decision on these things in the future, we should probably have the authors present at the meeting, or at least try and get them here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I mean, my gut is that, sorry, Joe, did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead. I'm looking at like other places. So like we have an unset command in config. So if kubectl config unsets. Just trying to look for other places where people do stuff. Yeah, git config has an unset also. So I think an alternative here would have set with a -- clear or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably the only other option. So it's actually not a matter of what's the name, but we either have a separate command like unset or do something under set. We use that kind of pattern in some other places like set -- clear or -- remove, something like that. I personally don't like that too much, but so I would personally be in favor of a separate command. So probably unset, but.
One thing I think that might come up is if it's a flag on set, then does everything support it because it's on every single set command?
Well, I mean, there's some things that we won't support unset on, like you can't unset the image on a container, right?
Right. In which case, the flag it would throw an error, right? And it's somewhat, if you wanted to get a list of things that you can unset, it's a little bit harder, I guess.
Yeah, my major concern with -- clear or something like that under set is the mutually exclusive problem of flags. Because sometimes set has a lot of flags and they really don't conform with clear. So clear is absolutely exclusive with most of the other flags you have under set. So that kind of automatically, for me, makes it a separate command. But it's not a huge issue if you don't have too many flags under your set command. But if you start getting a lot, it gets complicated, right? But anyway, I really didn't check other places where we use that pattern. If we are broadly using those kind of things, that could be an argument in favor of -- clear or something like that.
I think unset is clear. It's more porcelain. Seems fine.
Yep. Thanks, Joe, for checking on those things. That was a smart thing to do. Cool. Okay, so it sounds like we have general consensus on this isn't a terrible idea, but should go through and read the specifics of the document before merging it. Awesome. And I actually have to leave and run and catch a bus in about 1 minute.
Okay, I had one quick question, and I'm going to get it out there right now. And as we're doing the KSonnet stuff, one of the things I'd love to do is to be able to have a KSonnet program result in essentially a full package deployment of all the objects that you want to have happen. And ideally, this would be something that we could pass and pipe to apply across the entire set of objects. One of the problems with prune and why everybody's afraid to actually enable it is that if you get the labels mixed up wrong with the set of objects, you end up deleting a bunch of stuff. Do we have essentially an object that I can pipe to apply -prune that includes the set of labels that this thing covers? Because then we can generate that with KSonnet, and this becomes a hell of a lot less dangerous. Have you guys had discussions on that before?
I didn't quite, I understand the problem. The solution was, sorry, an object with that says.
So right now you can pass a list, an API list to kubectl apply, and it's a single stream with a whole bunch of objects, right? What I guess the question is that can I actually generate something, pipe it to kubectl apply --prune, and have it be both all the objects and the set of labels that we're using to actually prune to, right? Because right now I think the problem is that the set of objects that you're actually creating and then the labels that you're using for prune, those things come from two different places, right? Some of them come from the file system, some of them come in. Like if we actually had one thing that we could pipe, all of a sudden this thing starts becoming a lot less dangerous.
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's super dangerous. I agree with why it's dangerous. One, I hadn't been thinking about that particular use case. The way I'd been thinking about it is, because another thing is when you run apply on a directory, another fear I have is if you run it on a subdirectory, and even if you get the labels right, you like
have all the
miss
objects.
a whole part of your tree and you just blow away a bunch of stuff. Yeah, right. That's why if you read the document about apply, it's like only do this if you don't care about yourself.
It's a pretty sharp knife. So I'm thinking, can we come up, and I'm looking at it from the point of view of KSonnet. With KSonnet, we're going to have a way to actually bring together a whole bunch of stuff and generate it. And if we generate the thing with the labels, it's going to be a lot harder to screw that up.
Yeah.
If there's any prior art there, I want to make sure I look at it. Otherwise, it's something that as we make some progress with the KSonnet stuff, we might come up with a proposal at some point.
I have an issue for this. I'll throw it in the notes.
Okay.
It goes at it from the angle where, and I think these could work together. Like I want with prune a structured object that has the labels.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that object would live at the root of the directory you'd apply. And so when you run apply, it'll check for it at that root. And if it doesn't exist there, it's not going to apply because then it solves that other problem. But we could also probably accept it on standard in.
Yeah, well, I mean, if like right now in standard, you can take a list and then kubectl knows how to parse that up and create across the entire thing. I don't. Well, okay, so let's take that offline. I just wanted to do a quick question on that and see if there was anything that I hadn't seen yet there.
No, we're not. Yes, we have the problem, but yeah, it would be great to have a solution there.
All right, cool. Well, I'll let you go, Phil.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, talk to you later.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, we are actually out of time already. So any wrap up you guys want to do? Otherwise, we are done here. We're probably going to have another CLI meeting next week because we canceled last week. So, a lot of stuff to discuss. So next week is game for our meeting. So any wrap ups?
I probably won't be here next week, but you guys don't need me anyway.
Okay. Okay, that's it then. Thank you, guys. Have a good week. Bye-bye.